Hey, my friends, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Thank you for hanging out with me. I know you got so many things to do. 10, 15 minutes, it ain't what it used to be. It's tough to find those kind of blocks in the rhythm of a day. And yet here we are having this conversation, inching our way through a 2,000-year-old document together, trying to better understand how that would have come off to the original recipients of that document, how that's come off to people across the ages, what that looks like and what it means now, and how it all fits into a larger historical, cultural context. It's really fun for me to have the opportunity to try, where possible, to come at it with a neutral text-based read instead of an exclusively persuasive read where I try to get you to think every single thing exactly the way I think it. I mean, it's an important book, and it's a big book, and it's a complex book, and it takes a while to think about, and it's possible that we might read it and come to slightly different conclusions. And I love that we got a room full of people here, some of whom would say, I'm not really in a position of faith, but I am very interested in the Bible. I'm very interested in the book of Matthew. I'm very interested in better understanding my friends, family members, my neighbors who would ascribe supernatural prominence to the Bible. And I want to learn about this stuff. I love that there are also people in the room who would say, I think there's a God behind it. And I'm a person of faith, and I want to go deeper in my faith by better understanding Jesus and the book of Matthew. And there just aren't very many diverse rooms on the internet anymore. It feels like you can only hang out with people who are just like you and think all the same stuff. So thank you for being how you are. Thank you for being willing to internet associate with people who are not exactly like you in every single way. I hope that your decision to be that kind of person, to handle yourself that way in the physical world, in the digital world, is something that makes your life rich and robust and full of life and hope and optimism and encouragement from people like you and not like you. And I hope that the conversations we get to have here about the book of Matthew are something that proves to be wildly encouraging to you in terms of the transcendent, big questions of life about this, in my opinion, most transcendent, most biggestest document in the history of documents. So here we are. You know what isn't freaky or scary at all? My 10-year-old son. You know what is freaky and scary? My 10-year-old son walking in the deep woods in a full moon late at night when I think he's in bed and I'm peering out into the darkness of the foresty little house we lived in out in the country, and I see some shadowy figure moving through the trees where I never see shadowy humanoid figures moving through the trees. But the reason it's freaky is because no one should be there. There's no reason any human at this hour would be walking through that forest. And you know that little thing inside of you where, like, whenever you're in a car by yourself late at night and your headlights turn and you almost picture that thing that always happens in a horror movie where you turn and suddenly, boom, there's just something in front of you. It's like, the idea that somebody is somewhere isn't scary at all. People are everywhere. That's great. It's just when they're in places that they're not supposed to be that we kind of lose our marbles, and something as simple as, hey, there's a person, can flip from completely normative and even reassuring in many ways to completely horrifying. And that is exactly the situation we run into in Matthew 14, which on its surface would seem to be about some big dramatic political and miraculous anecdotes. But if you look closer, what we're dealing with here is kind of the same theme that is being unpacked on a TV show I'm watching right now called WandaVision. I mean, the story seems like it's about superheroes and explosions and some kind of X-Files thing, but really the show's about grief. And really, Matthew chapter 14 is about grief. The big political hubbub that's described in the opening verses of the chapter ends with Jesus' cousin and hype man and right-hand man and the guy who has his back, John the Baptist, getting beheaded at a drunken party. It can be fun to crack jokes and stuff about that. Like, obviously, I think it's kind of funny to crack a few jokes about that because we have the benefit of 2,000 years and us not being related to the guy. But for Jesus, this was fresh news, and it was emotionally significant, thinking about how the death of his cousin represents the end of an age, thinking about how just losing your cousin and a person you care about is very sad. But also there's this other thing that happens with death that all of us process whenever we go to a funeral, whenever we hear about somebody passing away. There's just this little quiet, unspoken thing that's like, that will be me. It reminds me that my death is inching closer. And Jesus had a very intentional purpose for his death. But still, I mean, if he was all God and he was all man, as the text holds him out as being, that's a sobering, weighty thing to process through. So we get this political anecdote, and then the news hits Jesus, and he's like, oh man, that's tough. I got to get away. But people won't let him get away because he's amazing. And so they follow him as he sails in a boat to get away and take some time to reflect on all of this stuff. And they catch up with him, and Jesus is like, you know what? I ain't even mad that you all followed me. I'm going to take care of you. And so in his grief, he takes care of them, teaches them, does miraculous stuff, and they're all hungry, and he does another big miracle to demonstrate that he is provider, that his Father is provider, and to demonstrate compassion for these crowds. And while that's cool and all, we still have this big lingering plot line in chapter 14, which is grief. Now, trust me here, I still got my train of thought. We're getting back to the whole scare thing in the woods, but grief is the theme of the chapter. And so we get to verse 22, the end of the feeding of the 5,000. It says, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. So I want to draw your attention again to Matthew's chronological cues that he is so fond of using. He says immediately, meaning that the feeding of the 5,000 is done. Everybody's fed. It's been awesome. We're going to call it a night. And so he turns to the disciples. He's like, all right, in the chaos of this crowd dispersing, this is how I picture it at least, I want you guys to get in the boat, and I want you to go on ahead of me, and I'm just going to finish up getting everybody out the door here. And the text says that Jesus was having them go to the other side. That, of course, means the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Again, I don't think they were going like all the way straight across the Sea of Galilee. I don't think they were heading down toward like Tiberias or where the Jordan River starts heading down toward the Dead Sea. We're at the top end of the Sea of Galilee. I think this crossing is probably a relatively short one. And if Jesus is trying to get away, my assumption would be, and I guess the original audience's assumption would be, without them having read ahead yet, that he's going to do that short little cut across from 12 o'clock on the Sea of Galilee, probably over toward like 3 o'clock again, where he went last time. The heat from him doing miracles and people getting all excited got turned up, and he went and he had the incident where he cast out the demons and they went into the pigs. He's probably heading towards somewhere that he won't be as recognized, won't be as well known, and that would be the east side of the lake, 3 o'clock kind of region. So then verse 23 says, after he dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. I don't know exactly what we mean by mountainside here. I mean, certainly not like I or somebody else from the American West would think of a mountain. I mean, it's not like he went and summited a 14er or something and now he's on the top of Holy Cross freezing. He's got ice in his beard and everything, like some kind of shaman warrior monk scene in a movie. It's not like that at all. The mountains here, I mean, they're hillsides, and pretty dramatic hillsides coming up from the Sea of Galilee, which really does sit in a very low basin. And so he probably picked one of these where there wasn't a village or town at the top, went and hung out there. And he's doing a thing that we're going to see him do at other points here in the Gospel of Matthew, which is stuff gets difficult. He feels pressure. He resorts to his relationship with his Father, and that's what he's doing. He's praying. He's going to interact with his Father. That's his source of strength. That is his guiding principle. That is his absolute true north. And when things are difficult, that's what he does. So when evening came, he was there alone. But the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. And we talked all the way back in Matthew chapter 8 about the spontaneous nature of great big storms on the Sea of Galilee. You can go back and catch that episode if you want to break that down and refresh your memory. But long story short, this relatively calm boat ride has now turned into something very chaotic as the evening begins to give way to night. So in terms of a getaway strategy, I like what Jesus is doing here. He's like, well, last time we were on a boat, everybody can see a boat from the shore, so they knew right where I was going. But I really do need to go and spend time in silence, alone with my Father, and process this big thing that just happened here. He's up there doing his thing. Sounds like he needed to do. He comes down. He's like, oh, there's that boat is in turmoil. It's a long ways from shore. And if it says it's being buffeted by the waves because of the wind, it means the boat, at least as I read it, is not in control of itself anymore. Jesus is a Sea of Galilee guy. He knows what it looks like when a boat is in distress. In the same way, you and I can look at a car or somebody who's riding a skateboard down a hill too fast and they start to get into the speed wobble and you're like, that's what it looks like right before things get horrible. So then a little bit of time passes between verse 24 and verse 25, because in verse 24, it's like evening giving way into night. And then 25 says, during the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. So the fourth watch, it's like 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. Every reference I can find says that. I don't actually know this off the top of my head. I had to Google that stuff, but 3 a.m. to 6 a.m., something like that. So some time has elapsed. They've been taking a beating out there in this boat through the whole night. They're exhausted. They're stressed. Think about how it feels to you driving on icy roads for a few hours when you got to get from one place to another during difficult weather. You are way more tired than you are after covering the same distance in lovely conditions. So that's the setup coming into verse 25. And I just read you verse 25, but is that not the most casual thing ever? Like for Matthew to just sit down and be like, how do I want to describe what happened here? So, okay, me and my friends, we're out on a boat. We're taking a total beating out there. It is not going well. It has crossed our minds that we might die. Like in the back of our minds, we're like, remember that one time that Jesus fixed it though? How's this exactly going to play out? It's kind of starting to freak out. It'd be great if there was Jesus sighting right about now. And then Matthew gets to that part and writing down what he remembers about all this. He gets to where verse 25 is supposed to go. He's like, I guess I'll just make this about as understated as the part where I described me converting from being a lifelong scoundrel to a follower of Jesus. So as you just heard, Matthew does decide to go with the understated route. And once again, he says, during the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. Wait, what now? Needle scratch? Pardon? Like he was how? Did you say jet ski? Because it sounded like you said walking on the lake. And that doesn't make any sense because of how physics is. But no, in case you thought you might have misread that, verse 26, when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. And thus we come back to that thing I was saying about my kid walking in the woods that one night out in the dark and me having a little lump in my throat of a momentary terror as I saw a humanoid in the woods where there shouldn't be a person. Seeing Jesus, very, very encouraging. Seeing Jesus at 3 a.m. walking across water in the middle of a storm, that's going to be more terrifying for anybody in any context. You're already worn down. You're tired. You're exhausted. You're already thinking about death. Is this death approaching me? Did Jesus die? Is this his ghost? Is that actually Jesus? Just none of this makes any sense, and it's really freaky. And maybe sometimes I gloss over a little bit the human response to some of these crazy things that are happening with Jesus, but I'm not going to gloss over it here. I'm going to end on this note. They see this thing that should not be, that is a person where people aren't supposed to be, and that takes it from cool to horrifying, and they rightly respond by shrieking in fear. They're all in an even deeper panic than they were a minute before, and tomorrow we're going to break down how that pivots from being horrifying to being unbelievably reassuring and think about what that might mean. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon, my friends.